That's awesome. Having run a conference or two, I kind of know how hard it is. Anybody here try to get DerbyCon tickets last week? Anybody actually get them? Okay, got a couple. I got them. That's good. 13 seconds, crazy. It sold out, so that's always fun. But I appreciate everybody coming out to my talk. Today is talking about legit communications involving both red and blue, and really this spawns off of a lot of the things that we're seeing as far as trending over the last year on companies. I think companies are actually getting better when it comes to security. They're focusing on more visibility. They're looking at ways of improving. You have things like the MITRE ATT&CK framework that's coming out, so you can do simulations of things. Things are starting to get a little bit better where originally look at like 10 years ago, pen testers would come in, they'd smash and grab everything, and they'd give you a report, and they'd walk out high-fiving because we owned everything, and then we were the rock stars, right? And I'm just as guilty as that. I was the one high-fiving everything and doing the chicken dance after I got DA and everything else and stealing credentials. But what was really happening then was we had a severe gap between the blue side and the red. So we would go in, we'd have the institutional knowledge of how to attack, and the blue team would get this report and they'd fix everything, and then they'd come through, and then all of a sudden, 6 months later we do the exact same thing, or a year later we do the exact same thing, just a different way. And so what you're seeing now is a huge focus on the blue team understanding red tactics. Whether it's trying to emulate adversaries and the cool things now being Russia and doing awesome PowerShell injection and WMI persistence, whether it's that cool or it's really organized crime like Fin7 who does binary droppers and stuff like that, we're trying to emulate what our threats are. And that's awesome, because when we're looking at how we need to kind of evolve and what we need to do, a lot of these things really come down to understanding what we do as attackers. And ultimately, companies that understand that, at least from our experience, do much better on these types of engagements. It's caused us as a company, so I run TrustedSec and I run Binary Defense, and I'm one of the founders of DerbyCon. With TrustedSec, what we've had to do is actually create an entire research division for our really good customers, because we have to literally own them in techniques that haven't been discovered before. Because they're that good, and there's only a couple of them, by the way, that we've run into. Most of them else, we don't have to use the cool stuff. We have this cool folder. It's actually Confluence, but we have this cool GitHub page, and it's cool stuff we get to use in certain customers. But what's nice about that is there are companies out there that are actually doing a really good job. And the difference is it's not the latest and greatest EDR that someone purchased. It's not a piece of technology that someone bought. It comes down to the people. And they actually have a team that focuses on understanding. They might have an EDR, but they've completely bastardized that tool to their own because they focus on their environment and everything that's happening out there. So it's really cool to see, and I'll talk a little about that. And I think I pretty much did my whole presentation already. Just a brief intro of myself. I started Binary Defense and TrustedSec. We're located out of Cleveland, Ohio. We have folks all over the place. We actually have a booth downstairs, so if you want cool swag of like camera covers and USB backdoors that take control of your computer, we have those. I also help out Mr. Robot every once in a while. It was kind of cool. Last year in season 3, Elliot actually said, "Hi, I'm Dave Kennedy. I work upstairs with Craig," and I thought that was like the coolest thing ever. I've actually been in a rap video, and I'm not even joking. Weirdest experience I've ever had. So it was funny. I was actually they wanted to have like a hacker come on and like do a technically accurate thing and take the person out of it. It was a Chris Brown music video, so whether you like him or not or whatever, I don't know. I don't listen to rap. I'm like a 90s grunge person. But I was in the video and I started bobbing my head and like, can you please stop bobbing your head? I'm like, oh yeah, sorry about that. And so I stopped bobbing my head. But it was fun and exciting. But they wanted to portray hackers, which was really cool. They wanted something technically accurate to go through, and it's neat to see all of that happening all over the place. So it's amazing to see what's been going on and where we're at. I mean, you look at when I started in information security, I was one of the feds that wasn't spotted, I guess, at DEF CON 9. And I was working for the Marine Corps on the intelligence side. And I went to my first DEF CON and had a great experience. It was like going to Alexis Park, right? And seeing folks collaborating and sharing information. It was really kind of the start of, at least for me, of the information security space where people were coming out with new techniques, new tactics, and they're sharing it. You look at today, it's a little bit different, right? We don't share as much as our techniques. If you look at like Exploit DB, which was previously Millworm with Stroke and all those guys, it's a lot different. We don't come out with as many exploits as we used to because we pack a lot of that internally. The techniques, there's a lot of great people in the research side like Casey Smith and Matthew Graber and those guys that are releasing cool techniques, but a lot of companies are taking those and holding those back because they don't want to give their trade secrets and everything else. So you look at where we've come from before to today, we actually have to develop capabilities to keep up with what's happening out there. And this is the first time I can remember where blue is actually getting better. Like I remember going, I used to say in presentations 5 years ago, hey, I would just run MSO 867 on one machine that they forgot about, which still actually happens all the time, but not on all of them. And you'd get access to a machine and they'd have a local admin password, and then from there you move out. Or, hey, I just fired up Responder, and the person that had their credentials sent back was a local admin, and then all of a sudden now you move from that machine out to the other. And it's like a 45-minute pen test, and you get to write code the rest of the time. It's awesome. So we've all done that, don't believe me. So when they're so bad, it's like, listen, at least if you're concerned, is me staying on this network for another 5 days. But you look at that, and there's a lot fewer of those. Perimeters, breaches from the outside. We actually had companies where it's really difficult to social engineer and spearfish. Like, we had really cool ones too. Like, there was one where we actually combed LinkedIn and saw their employee dates, right? And saw when they had an anniversary. And this actually works really well for almost everybody, but not this company for some reason. Their education awareness is like super awesome. But what you do is, if you tie a monetary value to something, you don't want to go too crazy. So you can send an email from like hr@whatevercompany.com and spoof it, or put like a little dash at the end of it or something that mingles it. And if you tie it to like, hey, congratulations on your 2-year anniversary, the day that they have it, you're already building up some believability, because someone's like, oh, someone's not going to spoof me for that. But here's a $15 gift card to Starbucks, right? And of course, there's a whole bunch of horrible stuff in there that compromises their computer. In those cases, it works very well. But this one company, they said if you ever get an email from HR, you need to forward it to HR first and then get verification for it. It was some crazy process that they had to go and do. I'm like, so I got busted, and it was legit $10 or $15 gift card to Starbucks. They actually could have. I figured if we're going to own their computer, might as well pay them for it. But it ended up working out well. But that company did some really awesome processes in place, and half of their employees don't even have email addresses. You have to go through like their web portals and actually use things. So it was even hard for us to find people to go after. So people are getting better. But what's interesting is we're still a long ways to go. What's interesting about what's happening today around, I'm sure you heard this term, the tactics, techniques, and procedures of everything, right? The TTPs, you hear TTPs everywhere. It's blown up. It's like there's gonna be TTP like products that stop TTP soon. I'm sure it's gonna be like the next generation TTP finder. And there are already tools coming out to go and test them out too, right? Automation of penetration testing, and simulate your own TTPs everywhere. I always think TP, but anyways, TTPs are interesting because if you look at where we were 15 years ago with antivirus, right? You'd get a piece of code, and that code would be malicious, and there was a small percentage of code that was malicious, I guess, at that time. And so you write a signature for that, and that signature would then go into a database, and then you update your signatures, and then you trigger off of that, right? We're doing the exact same thing as 15 years ago with specific types of techniques. We're taking things like the MITRE ATT&CK framework, right, which is a great resource of understanding a lot of things, and you're saying, okay, we're going to take that and we're going to build a signature off of that. And so what they do is you look at the latest one with WMIC, the /register command. So if you're not familiar with application control bypasses, they're ways of getting code execution onto systems that get around traditional methods. So PowerShell, if they're using PowerShell version 6, which no one is ever using. If they're using script block logging detect, which no one is ever doing. If you're using constrained language mode, which again no one's ever doing, you might have a good chance of not getting successful PowerShell execution. So you have the ability to use application control bypasses. So a lot of the EDRs that you saw, and we got to test a lot of these out recently on a recent engagement, they'll look for WMIC, and then in the command line, they'll look for -register or /register. So the /register is how there's a variable you can get remote code execution on. So what happens when you do /r:\register? No problem, it doesn't get around it, or it gets completely around the EDRs that they're writing specifically off of that command. So if you modify your techniques in any way, shape, or form on these EDR tools, you pretty much have full gamut to do whatever you want to. And I'll show some examples of that. But they're literally signatures of what we're dealing with from yesterday. So if you change something, it was just like, does everybody remember Shikata Gaine in Metasploit, right? That was like the coolest thing ever for like the longest time. It was polymorphic, but they ended up figuring out a way to do detection off it. But it was like the greatest one for like 4 years. Like it got around all the antivirus stuff and everything else, but they figured out ways around that. It's exactly the same thing. You modify your code in some way, shape, or form to make it look a little bit different. Certutil with the -ping variable. Again, if you space that out in the different locations, it's not going to find it. Or you do a set variable first, and then you call it, it's not going to get picked up. So there's so many ways of getting around these things. We have a long ways to go. And it literally is looking at a lot of the AVs of before to now. And so if you look at most organizations, they build their threat models off of what they see out there. So whether you're using Splunk, or they're using Carbon Black, and you have watch lists. Watch lists are my favorite, right? That's actually how Unicorn has evolved. So we ran into a customer that was using Carbon Black, and they had watch lists, and they were looking for anything encoded command. And if you know encoded command with PowerShell, there's like 14 different variations of encoded command. You have -E, -EC, -EN, -ENCO, et cetera, et cetera. And with that, they had every single one of those used. So then I just use set variable and get variable, and I push encoded command through randomized string in Unicorn, and it gets around all their watch lists, right? So again, modifying things to be a little bit different is some of the ways that we as attackers have to continuously morph as well. And what's interesting is most of the stuff is coming from public research. If you look at where Microsoft's at, right, they rely extremely heavily off of the research community. And so when someone like Casey comes out or other people come out, like if I release a new version of Unicorn, Microsoft will release or try to release a signature for Unicorn to automatically detect it, or if a new technique comes out, to try to automatically release a signature for that. So they're using the research community very heavily. And then you also have threat intelligence feeds, i.e. predominantly Twitter, right? Is exactly where all these threat intelligence feeds come from. It's all Twitter, pretty much. So, but it's all of these different feeds that we use in order to get our intelligence. And so what happens is they have these tools, but you don't have the people to staff it. So you're relying off of these EDRs or a lot of these different types of tools to look for abnormal patterns of behavior. And in a lot of cases, again, if you modify in any way, shape, or form, you're fine. Where the difference is that if you have people that are looking for things like, a good example would be PowerShell. Why is a regular user executing PowerShell in your environment? Or why is PowerShell have a command line length of like 300? Or why is it beaconing out to the internet all of a sudden, right? Those are behaviors that I would want to look at and give it to a human to say, okay, maybe our current detections aren't going to detect it, but a human probably could say that if you look at a whole bunch of mangled code, it's probably not legit, right? And so that's the difference between what we're seeing today with these tools versus when people actually get discovered during a breach. When I was talking about that one company we did an assessment for, none of their tools picked us up. The people picked us up. And that's the best part about it. So we can learn a lot from TTPs, but again, without direct simulations, you're gonna fall behind with a lot of things. And I'll show you some examples here. If you look at this EDR specifically, and this EDR, it would flag on command.exe/c/q equals. But if you just did command.exe/c/q, you're fine, no problem. And you can go as long as you want to in their environment without detection. This one was interesting. So Microsoft released a update for Defender, and this is not a knock on Microsoft. Thank you all for the building and everything else here. Throw that caveat out there. What was interesting is Microsoft released an update that detected Unicorn. Okay, so it's one of my tools that I write. It's a PowerShell exploitation framework that does mangled code for code injection. So you can do like Cobalt Strike shell code or Meterpreter shell code, whatever shell code you want to inject into memory directly through PowerShell. And in this one specifically, when they released it, I have a tool that will monitor AMSI, so the anti-malware scan interface. And it'll monitor it to find exactly what piece of code is getting flagged by AMSI. And if you don't know, AMSI is literally signature-based detection, right? So, but it's a couple layers down. So when PowerShell goes to execute, it puts it against AMSI in order to get detected. And then from there, it's basically signature analysis for a lot of things, right? So I saw that one of my blocks of code was getting detected. It was how I allocated memory to the stack size. So I was allocating 1,000K of memory so that I can inject my shellcode directly into memory through virtual alloc. And so when I was doing that, what was interesting is it would trigger, and then any specific script after that would trigger. It was a big bug in in Defender. So if you were able to trigger antivirus, every single file and every single PowerShell command, everything that you execute would be then would be flagged as malicious afterwards. So it was a nice bug, and it survived reboots. Or I'm sorry, you had to reboot in order to fix it. So I found a nice Sev1 bug on PowerShell, which is pretty cool. And we'll show a little bit about that in here in a second. But then you look at this, I mean, and again, let's just say this gets around your detection. Would a human look at this and say, hey, that's probably not legit? Do you want Bob in sales running this command? Is that good, right? Probably not, right? So in this specific case, we're literally hoping that our endpoint detection pieces do it and can actually detect this. But this one specifically, I mean, hopefully we're detecting a no profile or exec bypass, which is getting around execution restriction policies. And then downloading a file is another one. Why would you ever want to leverage PowerShell to download a file and then execute an exe and then start it? That sounds awesome. There's actually a funny story about this one. So I actually had a company that mirrored this very much so, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys are compromised and everything else. Like, no, that's actually really our crappy application that goes and downloads an exe once a day and executes it. I'm like, okay, that's cool. This one too, would you detect this? So this is actually calling the certutil attack. So this is using certutil with the -ping option, and it's using set variables for that. And notice they put things in there like carrots, and this is from, I think Daniel. Yeah, Daniel's awesome. And here it actually pulls down the PowerShell command and then executes it without ever using the internet. So your PowerShell is not actually beaconing out to the internet, but it's getting its code directly from CertUtil. Would you see that? So those are the things that, as a human, if you saw that, what would you think? Bob in sales, probably not doing something good, right? Probably got fished. Or more. This one's Kofter. This one uses MSHTA for persistence, and it's what we call fileless persistence methods. So it puts its code into multiple registry entries and then does an evaluation statement to reassemble that code and uses MSHTA to actively call it. So it's persistent, it stays on the machine, but it never actually drops a binary onto the system itself. There's never any files involved on those, and we're seeing a lot of those move and shift towards that. Here's Casey. This was him doing MSHTA, which is a great binary, and then using it to call an SCT file, loading Mimikatz strictly into memory, which is awesome. Again, things that you might not see. Now, one thing I'll say is typically if you ever see MSHTA executing in your environment, that's a bad thing, okay? Most folks don't use MSHTA, and if you're not familiar with HTA files, they're high content HTML files, so they're .hta extensions. We would recommend blocking those at your firewall if you haven't already. Most people already do, which is great. But you want to do it based on MIME type, not extension type, because you can serve up an HTA that has a different extension type and serve the MIME type up as an HTA and still get it to execute. So just a couple FYIs on that one. But this one was pretty good. But there's a whole bunch of these, right? And that's why the application control stuff, everybody heard of lol bins and all that other stuff, right? There's a whole bunch of them, regsvr32, CBD, CSC, a number of executables that Microsoft is giving us awesome access to. Again, this is not a knock on Microsoft. Is giving us awesome capabilities to do remote code execution directly from a trusted binary that is inside of Microsoft's platform that's trusted, right? So if you're doing application whitelisting, these are circumvention techniques away from those, which are awesome. The WMIC one with register is fantastic. CertUtil is fantastic. BG info, background info, you can call remote VB scripts and get remote code execution for background desktops. It's awesome. There's a whole spot for us. So in stating that, I'm going to show you a demo here. And in this one specifically, I'm going to show you a demo of a tool that I wrote recently. It's called TrustedSec. Yeah, I know, a couple laughs there. So what TrustedSec is, and this is an emulation of something that you're probably not going to see in your environment. Now what's important about this is that the way TrustedSec works is it'll go out and clone any website you want to. You can import your own, okay? And it'll import your own website directly into TrustedSec, and then it does dynamic obfuscation throughout the entire HTML source code, and it does full command and control through a legitimate website. So all of its communications are going to be done via GET requests, and it's going to emulate a browser in every way, shape, or form, so that you're basically browsing a website, and it looks like browsing a website in every way, shape, or form, but all the code is tucked directly into it dynamically every single time with dynamic encryption keys. So it's pretty sweet, and it's multi-threaded, so it allows you to have as many shells as you want to. So if you have 50 people calling in, you can interact with all of those. So let's go ahead and launch this. This is all open source. So what it's going to do, notice here it's just going to clone google.com. So if you look here, clone google.com, site cloned. And if I browse it, oh, something went wrong. Oh, yeah, hang on, me drop Apache. One sec. I run it again, it'll clone it. Now I'm inside of Trevor. Now if I go into a browser here, and I'll just go to localhost. One second. I don't know why I did HTTPS. So notice here, it's not going to load exactly properly, but notice here it's Google. Google's website's cloned. It actually clones really well, but I guess I'm using Firefox on the local host. It's not so good. But it'll clone the website you want to. And again, everything we're doing is tucked into this. So you can clone any website you want. And then the loaders, the stagers that you want to execute on there, we have a few different options. We have a Python one that works both on Windows and Linux. We have a PowerShell one, so you can leverage PowerShell directly from it. And we also have a .NET one. So wherever you can get remote code execution, you can go and execute this from. And I'll go ahead and launch it over here. I don't know why that resolution's like so tiny. Need glasses. Getting old. All right, so this is the PowerShell version. Now, the only thing you have to do, you can customize all these fields. So what the stub does and what the site path does is it makes it look like it's loading files from the site itself. So the stub would be something like, hey, I'm going to load an image, blah.jpg or whatever that is. But those are actually the names of the files are the way that it actually pulls back the data. So it looks like it's actually sending loading the site itself with all the file names. It's actually passing data back and forth via GET requests. So if I go and execute this, Go back over here, we see a connection received. And then I can just do help, and it'll tell you to list. And I can see here that I have a command and control established with this first one here over again, just purely web browsing. And it does randomize time intervals too, so it looks like a user browsing the site. So it emulates a regular user trying to browse the site based off of different time intervals. So if you're trying to do like time analysis off of beacons, you're not going to see that. And then if I do interact, again, it's going to take a second when I type in ipconfig. It'll take a second for it to come back because it is doing the time intervals. It's going to reassemble that real time. And we got code execution on a machine through browsing websites. Cool stuff. Now it's interesting, I'll show you Unicorn real quick too when we got a second. If you haven't used Unicorn, it'll allow you to do certutil, Cobalt Strike, and a bunch of other stuff. And let me just do interpreter. And I'll launch this real quick. But you can use them as HTAs. You can do macros as well. Whatever you want to do your PowerShell encoding for. And if I open this up, I'm sure everybody can read that, right? Look good? So this is what it does here. So this is all PowerShell. Now it chunks up the encoded command, the base 64 string. Notice here like the equal signs are split. It also splits it in a couple other places. So if you're trying to do base 64 analysis of it, automatic detection of that, it'll split that. But notice here I never call encoded command in any way, shape, or form. So there's never an encoded command that ever gets passed in that variable. There's no profile. There's no anything else. And what's also funny too is most people look for like dash encoded command. You know you can do dash. You can do a / instead. So that gets around most stuff as well, and carrots and all that good stuff. So just simple ways of doing it. So if you look at that, and what we see from attackers, right, we're going to typically use as much as possible to fall under legitimate traffic. So we'll look at things like 18443 as methods outbound, right? So HTTP or HTTPS. We'll also use DNS as a main method for DNS exfiltration. So we use legitimate communication. So what's interesting about most companies is that we had this big push for SSL termination years ago, but like everybody was like, oh, that's too hard, and they stopped doing it. And so SSL termination is a huge area of opportunity for us to go and detect things. And so while it's an example, and that's an example of ways that we can get access to it, if you're not looking for patterns past the initial attack vector, okay, so take an actual attack. You look at everything from exploitation to persistence to escalation permissions to lateral movement, right? All of those are different phases of an attack. So if you don't get the initial compromise point, what do you do after that? The privilege escalation, can we detect off of that? So are they using name pipe impersonation or token duplication? What are the methods they're using for privilege escalation? How are they doing persistence? Are we using WMI persistence methods? Are we using scheduled tasks? What methods are we using there? Can we detect certain things in that piece? And then what do we do after that piece after that around lateral movement? A good example of lateral movement in a way so most people when they look for lateral movement, they look for a very specific technique around lateral movement. Why not? So if Bob in sales is now communicating to Marion IT's computer, is that normal? Probably not, right? You don't want him using local lower level protocols like SMB or RPC to communicate. So with Microsoft, they have event log 4624, right? Successful login. And if you're pulling event logs, grabbing the local logs, event log 4624 with login type 3, which means network login type, you can see those types of things happening from workstation to workstation communication. So again, those are ways that you can use event logs right now to actively go and do it. Another example too, is anybody using Sysmon yet? If you aren't, I'd heavily recommend it. Free tool from Microsoft. You can go and download it, and it exposes what's called ETW, event log tracing. A lot of great stuff that you can pull from there for detection. What's interesting is that we still need to leverage red to enhance and improve, because if you're just going off of using a specific command line, then you're never going to see other ways around it to enhance your environment and what actual attackers are using. What's also nice is that InfoSec's starting to use a lot of the terms and emulate the military, right? A lot of times, like our group, we have a research division that builds cool stuff, and then we have operators, i.e. our groups that run the red teams that actively go and run the missions and the attacks, right? So we're emulating a lot of what the military is doing when it comes to adversary tactics, and that's really cool to see. What's interesting, if you look at most companies, is that they'll try to secure everything. And what's also interesting too is that, can anybody here implement protection really quick in their environment? right? Right? We all laugh, right? So like a good example is like the DD Auto one that came out earlier this year, right? So a researcher discovered a way to do remote code execution through Office documents, right? That didn't leverage macros. And so does anybody know the time it took by the time someone used DD Auto to the time it took for exploitation? 1 day. 1 day. Are you able to implement protection that fast in your environment? No way, right? So instead of that, detection has to become the way that you focus on it, because if we detect it over here, maybe we can isolate that system and minimize the damage. That's the battle that we play. But when people do threat models, it's interesting that they don't even look at a lot of the things that are the capabilities of the attackers are using. Like Fin7 is a great example. They're more organized crime and bank fraud, right? With Fin7, what's nice with them is they had this RTF 0-day, a rich text format 0-day, that when you opened up the RTF, it would go and download a file and execute on the system. What's interesting about that one is they still were downloading executables because everybody sucks at still blocking unsigned code. So they were still super successful, and as sophisticated as they were, they still leveraged executables for code execution instead of leveraging something else like PowerShell or something else. So if you look at threat models, understanding what you're trying to protect and what countries or organizations or things are in play is important. Your capabilities of understanding your threat intelligence, i.e. Twitter. So being able to understand what specific adversaries are doing, the capabilities they use, and then from there, building out your simulations and your capabilities to measure that are important. What's interesting with red teams as well, research has to be number one. So for us on the red team side, we spend probably, I would say, 80% of our time doing research. Research is super, super important, especially if we're going after a company. I'm sure no one here is on LinkedIn and posts that, hey, we have Palo Alto, or we have Symantec, or we have CrowdStrike, or we have this in our LinkedIn profiles, right? So I can't build an entire list of all the preventative tools that you have on your perimeter before I actually attack it. But research becomes the biggest thing that we do from a red team perspective, especially with the targets that we're doing. And then from there, identifying specific defensive capabilities that you might have, and then from there, working with blue to hopefully get better. And that's our whole goal here with the red team, is to work together to get better with what we're doing. That's super, super, super important. And so really, the whole goal of red teaming, and if you look at what I talked about before around penetration testing, right? Go and we smash and grab, and then we'd walk away with a report. Instead, the red team is playing a really big role in working hand in hand with the blue team to get a lot better. And so that's kind of like the old rationale thought, where we'd go in and rip stuff up. And then the current evolution is integration to blue teams. And that's really where I think as an industry we have to keep moving towards, where the red team is a direct extension off of the blue. So focusing on defensive capabilities, focusing on ways to get around our infrastructure, focusing on ways of identifying things. More of that purple approach that you hear out there, which is really cool. And what's nice about internal versus external, so if you have an internal red team, I'm a huge advocate of that. You have more knowledge around your environment, you have more relationships. And I think a lot of security things that occurred, a lot of the issues that we had with security, is that we were always kind of the draconian folks that like, hey, you can't do anything. And then we go do a penetration test and say, hey, see, these are all the things I told you couldn't do, and now we're pointing out all the issues with you, and you guys suck, right? And it caused all these pieces of animosity. Whereas when you have an internal team that's focusing on working with the blue, you have a much better relationship with them. That's when I was at Diebold. I came in after the voting machines, just throwing it out there. When I was at Diebold, the best thing that I did was work with my team. So when I was doing a red team exercise, I would sit there with them, working with them. I'd also buy them like pizza and beer after I destroyed everything because I felt bad. But we'd work with them to get better at what they're doing. I had a great relationship with them, and they'd work hard for you when they did stuff. So internal teams have a great way of being able to establish that baseline. I'm a huge fan of internal teams. External teams as well, usually they have different capabilities, different data sets, so they don't see the same environment every single time. They're focusing on a lot of different areas, and they usually have different types of capabilities or understanding around specific threats. So we are getting better, there's no question. But we have a long ways to go. And the biggest thing for me that I see for most companies, and what I see as far as most organizations, is that they literally build their detection off of what comes off of a specific area, or they use their EDR for the main purpose. The DD Auto is a good one. So when DD Auto came out, I won't name the name of the EDR solution, but do you know how long it took them to get a detection out? It's one of the top ones out there. How long did it take roughly? 3 weeks. 3 weeks, right? So 3 weeks to get a detection out for a highly popular specific exploit that's being used the next day. So if you're expecting the EDR products to keep up with the specific attacks, like if anybody is actually being able to detect every single one of the lol bins that's out there, I'd be surprised. There's so many different ways to get remote code execution in the systems that it's very difficult to keep up on. That's why you need a team to really focus on it. But it is awesome to watch, and it's cool to see. Did you guys hear, by the way, they're coming out with Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure number 3? It's confirmed. We've all been talking about the rumors for years, but it's finally confirmed. So it's a good way to celebrate tonight. So here's some good examples of some good detection. Exposing ETW is great. So event log tracing, if you haven't checked out Sysmon, I heavily recommend. Some great stuff there. Monitoring for suspicious behavior techniques instead of an actual command. The commands are fine. If you're looking for things like encoded command, those are good, high-value ones. But hey, I want to look at when regsvr32 is ever beaconing out the internet. I want to look at MSHT every time it's executed because it should no longer be executed in my environment. Deviations to specific pieces that are there. Looking for DNS exfiltration based on length of DNS packets, and looking at east-west traffic as well. This is my favorite meme, by the way. It's like the best ever. Like, and it gets better. Like, you watch it and it's the same thing, but it gets better for some reason. I don't know why. But it's the best. It's the best ever. Some good examples of good prevention. PowerShell version 6 is absolutely fantastic. It integrates, especially if you have it coupled with script block logging. So if you're not familiar with it, if I use some heavy obfuscation, what will happen with script block logging is it'll be right before it actually integrates into to execute the PowerShell code itself. So you get pretty much the decoded message that's going to be executed, decoded PowerShell that's going to be executed out there. Plus you have constrained language mode and a few other ones. So to this day, this one is my favorite, I would say by far. If you can block unsigned binaries in regular user profile directories, you've literally shaved off like 90% of your attack surface for what's out there today. It's ridiculous. Most compromises still to this day are executables that are being launched in some way, shape, or form from the user's profile directories. That is the easiest way to at least shave a lot of your noise. And so what you can say is, okay, if it's code signed, I'll allow it. Right? That's an easy way of not breaking things really quick and still allowing your environment to operate and work. Disallowing workstation communication and traffic. So enabling even just Windows Firewall to say I'm not going to allow lower level protocols like SMB and RPC. Does Bob and sales need to talk to Mary and IT over RPC and SMB? No, never, ever. So why not block those ports and say, hey, workstation communication, I'm not going to allow. So now you're stopping lateral movement in a lot of cases. Removing capabilities of DNS tunneling. SSL termination to me still huge. I still see a lot of companies that don't look for SSL traffic being done. There's so much things that you can look for within SSL termination in there. Huge advocate of application control. I think John Strand did a recent poll on for red teamers. What was the thing that stopped you the most? Is it artificial intelligence? Is it machine learning? Is it application control? Or is it traditional antivirus? And by far, the number one thing that makes it more difficult for us as attackers is application control, application whitelisting. It's bad. We don't use application whitelisting because it's got a bad terminology in the industry because we all try to do application whitelisting and it failed horribly. So application control is kind of where a lot of the things happen. So not allowing certain things to execute that haven't been executed before in your environment. And blocking known types, like if you don't need MSHT or regsvr32 or certutil with a ping variable, starting to lock those down specifically. And with Sysmon, you can actually detect those launches. So when that executable gets launched, if it has a network connections, you can trigger that and send an event off to where you actually get stuff. I ran a little bit over, but does anyone have any questions? I talk fast, there's a lot of stuff. I'm on a roll.
So as we're seeing the ability to block host-to-host traffic.
Oh yeah, sorry.
As we're starting to see my name is Andre. I work for Blackstone. So as we're seeing most organizations block host-to-host traffic, where do you see the pen testers moving within the environment as they're no longer able to do the credential shuffle across workstations?
Yep, that's a good question. So the question was, how do we, once you stop workstation communication, what do you do after that, right? And it's like we're actually going back about 10 years because what we do once we had a foothold in the environment is we look for server exploitation flaws. So I'm sure no one here has Apache with default creds in there or JBoss or Jenkins or anything that is out there, SQL servers, nothing like that in any environments. Null sessions still to this day, I don't understand why. But there's still a lot of server exposures that we have as an attack surface. And what's great about organizations is it's not only, it's only growing as far as the amount of servers that they're introducing as the companies grow. So once we have our foothold into a workstation environment, even though we can't move from system to system, we can still use it as a launching platform to get to the other server infrastructure to attack that. And we still have other ways, maybe instead of going after a workstation and using that workstation to pivot to a workstation I need, I just do some extra homework and I compromise the workstation I need that has access to the server environment. And so we see a lot of that, right? I'll target specific people in IT with specific pretext and go after them. And a lot of times they are very good at catching things like that, but if you make it believable enough, it's usually pretty decent. So we still have a lot of attack avenues available. It's not like once you shut down workstation communication, you stop lateral movement. It just makes it a little bit more difficult for us, which is what we're trying to do, right? Absolutely. Any other questions? Oh, sorry, we got to do, yeah. Sorry. I can hear.
So what are you doing once you get in, right? So I don't know, say your engagement's 2 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it is, right? You get in, you learn a little bit, but you get booted, right? And your C2 infrastructure for that, that short time's gone, right? What do you do, if they do keep catching you? How are you now? Obviously, it's going to get a little costly, right? Are you doing domain fronting? If so, what other techniques are you using and with that?
Yeah, so good question. And let's kind of differentiate a little bit. So penetration testing and red teaming are two different concepts, okay? Penetration testing is literally how much stuff can I find in a short period of time? So I have 2 weeks of an assessment or I have 4 weeks of an assessment. How many things can I find in that time frame? Usually that doesn't mean we bypass and circumvent all of your technology and everything else you have in place. We don't have enough time for that. Whereas red team engagements are supposed to span much longer and be more of a simulation of a real world attack, right? So those could last 2, 3, 4 months, not dedicated to that, but you're doing spaced out time over a specific period of time. And so we'll have operational infrastructure that we use with domain fronting and malleable C2s that we can move to different locations based off of that. So if we need to burn down an infrastructure, we can have it set up somewhere very quickly somewhere else. And we wrote our own custom, so it's our own train craft, we wrote our own custom command and control infrastructure that's just basically a small, tiny stager. So if it ever gets burned, we don't care. We just rewrite it in 2 seconds, and then after that, but we push all of our stuff to the system itself. That's our second stage payload. Then it ends up going into it. So in that case, it's very easy for us to shift and move. What we focus very heavily on is things like Markov chaining. So making sure that we stand under parent-child process that's a normal execution. So hey, if I'm going to spawn under Excel, I'm not going to spawn anything like command.exe or PowerShell.exe. I'll stay under things like mobsync or other ones that are legitimate processes for code execution that are still within Excel's normal tree span. So we'll stay in those, and then we'll typically monitor the systems for a while. We'll probe it and to figure out what they have on there, what preventative tools they have in place. So, and then we have environment labs where we test those out to make sure that our next command that we're going to run doesn't actually get detected in their environment. So it takes time for that, right? And we're working on continuously building out our capabilities even more, where it'll automatically probe the system itself, and it takes a lot of that user interaction stuff off of it. So more so what we saw from the shadow brokers and the equation dump leak, where they automatically profile a system to say, okay, these are the things on it, and based off of that, these are the things that we can run as far as commands. So I think that's where we're moving to as far as red team goes and our capabilities. It's just a matter of continuously making it better and better and better for how we do stuff. So good questions. Yeah. All right, I think that's all we got as far as time. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Dave, great job. I wanted to make an announcement. We do have an after party tonight, so